And welcome back to Subculture. Well, we've got a very, very special guest waiting on the line for us right now. The original Wailers are coming back to Australia for an absolutely amazing tour. And of course, Al Anderson is part of the original Wailers and he is with us today on the phone to chat about this amazing tour. Welcome to the program, Al.
I want to thank you, Dave, and Subculture for having me.
No worries at all. Now, Al, I've got to say, I am so excited about this tour. Can you tell us a little bit about how you feel about heading to Australia for this amazing tour?
Australia and New Zealand is a very primary area that was responsible for making Bob Marley and the Wailers in the early 70s what we are today, and what Bob represented on behalf of his singing and songwriting and his culture. We were embraced by the Australian people at a large number during the days when we toured there with Bob. And it was so, for us, it was such a wonderful thing knowing so many people cared about our singing, our songwriting, and the culture of Rastafarianism, along with the Aborigines, being a very strong culture that identified with Bob as being one of theirs. And I really dug, and I always dig Australia, because every time I go back to Australia, I just start feeling good. I'm in the Gold Coast, I feel good. I'm in Brisbane, I feel really good. And I'm in Sydney. I'm going to all these guitar shops. I'm eating the best food that can be offered. Accommodations are really nice. And, you know, every day is like an adventure pretty much when you're out in Australia. And you can always get a good jar anywhere and go somewhere and hear some entertainment where some talented people are playing instruments, singing together. So culturally, I think you have a really, really beautiful place to say, it's like Australia and New Zealand's God's country, for sure. And we've always, for me, it's special because, like I said, every time I come back, I'm not in an ultra modern city, although it's getting, I think they're building a lot in Australia these days because people are investing a lot of money in Australia, it seems. But I mean, when I go back to like Brisbane, and there's mom and pop shops where, I can get vintage instruments, vintage clothing, neat little t-shirts. So it's a throwback for me because I really like that about New Zealand, Australia, New Zealand, especially Australia, because that's one of the first places that we had large numbers of people come and embrace our music and show us a lot of love.
Why do you think that was? Why do you think that Australians were so quick to embrace the music of the Wailers?
They're a lot more cultured than the Americans are from that time to now, I think. A lot more reasonable, a lot more thoughtful. American people have a lot on their minds all the time, so they don't have the background and some of the cultures here clash a lot, and it seems that, in Australia, everything seems to be pretty level and smooth to me.
Definitely.
From what I saw. I mean, I socially see people really enjoying life, and I really dig that. Fishing, sport, art, good jar of beer, amazing wine. So there's a lot that would keep a society together on that level, I think. We need a lot more of that. We've got, California and the States has Napa Valley and Sonoma, but actually the wine is better in France.
Yep.
It's filtered better, it tastes better. There's more of a culture behind the wine, and the States has some good breweries, I must say, but when you go to Australia and you taste that white wine, it's pretty serious.
Did that surprise you that Australians were so open to the Wailers when you first came here for those tours?
Oh man, we brought like 2 tractor trailers of T-shirts from England, and within like the first couple of weeks, they were all gone. So I was like, wow, that's amazing, because we weren't selling merch anywhere else like that, and we weren't playing for those large crowds like that. And the Aborigine people decided that, they weren't going to buy a ticket. They were like, hey, man, we want to see somebody that we can totally relate to spiritually and musically. So they kind of trampled some really high fences down to come and take in our sound. And it was just like we were playing for such large numbers. I was shocked. Yeah. I was like, wow, this, we got to really be on our P's and Q's, and we were. And we just were amazed on the fact that we were really being taken in seriously with numbers and seriously from the culture aspect, which is really important.
Definitely. You have such an important legacy to keep Bob's music alive, and that's something that's been really important, because I don't know if it's the same in other countries, but here in Australia it seems like your music is passed down from generation to generation. My dad introduced me to your music. I've introduced your music to my nieces and nephews. Is that something you find with shows today, that legacy is continued with younger people coming along to the shows?
Man, it's just being passed back and forth. I mean, some shows, kids are coming and mothers and fathers are saying, like, he was born to Is This Love? And a lot of other people come and say that their grandmothers and grandfathers passed Bob Marley onto them, and they're passing it on to their children and their friends. So it's kind of like a long lineage of music that's being passed back and forth from grandpa to siblings, from siblings to children. And if Bob had only lived so long that he could have seen this amazing, overwhelming love for our music and him, he would have been a really happy man today, which would have made things like, if Bob was around today, I think there would be a lot more conscious music being respected, because it would have Bob set a trend with songwriting, so that, even in the Caribbean, if you couldn't read, you could understand what he was saying, because he was like a newspaper. Yep. He kept you up to date with politics. He kept you up to date with conditions and respect. So if he had only lived to see how wonderful the world is embracing Bob Marley and the Wailers music, it would be a happier day for him and us as well.
Definitely. And his music has such an important legacy as well. I want to go right back to when you first joined the Wailers. Tell us a little bit about that. How did that happen? Because I know you were involved with other bands before that. How did that happen, and what was that like when you first started to work with Bob?
I was introduced to Traffic and a group called Free. And they were island record bands that Chris Blackwell was distributing their music and producing some of it. And so I met Traffic and Free in Boston, like 1971. Chris Blackwell was there. And then they came to New York. And so I pilgrimaged to New York City to see Free and Traffic again, because I really dug their sound. And they were really cool guys. Dave Mason, Jim Capaldi, Chris Wood. And then, Steve Winwood, and then they changed the group, and they got Dave Mason left the group. They got Rebop Kwakuba, an African drummer. So they were really progressive. There wasn't a lot of English bands with African rhythms and percussion in their, let's say, pop music. It wasn't pop music. Traffic and Free were kind of like a blues rock group that had a lot of acoustic and singing and songwriting that a lot of other groups in the early 70s didn't have. So there was a CEO named Chris Blackwell who was always on the road with Traffic and Free. I befriended Steve Winwood. Jim Capaldi was my really good friend. Chris Wood was a really big friend. And the guitarist of Free, Paul Kossoff. Paul did All Right Now and My Brother Jake and Heavy Load. And when I saw Paul play, I really liked his style. And all of them used to say to me as I made friendship with them, you know, when they were touring around, I went pretty much on tour with them, wherever they were playing in the tri-state area of New York, Boston, and Jersey. That's the tri-state. Yep. I was always at their performances, and I got to meet them and hang out with them. And they all would say, hey, man, you got to come back to England because there's a lot of music that, you know, you could really get involved in because there's a big music revolution going on. And it was the early 70s. So you had Twiggy and all the incredible velvet clothes and high-heel snake shoes. And I was like, yeah, that's pretty cool. And then when I really looked into Chris Blackwell as a CEO and a record distributor, he's got like Nico and Eno. He's got 2 studios, and Roxy Music was another group. So I was like, wow, this guy's, he's really, he's right on time. He's pretty hip record producer, record CEO. So I decided to come over to England. But as I came over to England, I worked for Richard Branson first with Oswald and had a #1 with Delroy Washington. And so this went on for maybe a year or two, and then that broke up. And then I just wandered over to Ireland and saw Hammersmith Studios in Hammersmith. And I got to meet Chris Blackwell again. I got to be with Traffic and Free. And my relationship with Jim Capaldi and the saxophone player of Traffic became really tight. They were like my brothers. They looked after me. They gave me a place to stay when I came over to England. They said, man, you can stay in my townhouse here, and you know, you can come to the studio and hang out. They were really nice to me. So I eventually left Virgin Records and Richard Branson and started to be a tape operator at Island. So I was cleaning the board, vacuuming the studio, pouring tea for like Jimmy Page and Elton John, because a tape operator is basically, they teach you how to maintain the studio, and then they teach you how to run the studio, and then you become a certified engineer over a couple of years. Yeah. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be an engineer. I wanted to produce music. Playing was really cool because, you know, you get an opportunity to show your skills. But when I got to England, there was all these bands. There was thousands. OC Bisa. Oh, God. Free Traffic. All these Jamaican groups. Alton Ellis was there. John Holt was on the radio. Dennis Brown. But there was no Bob Marley that I knew of at that time, because it was Peter, Bob, and Bunny. And I think during that time, they had just finished Catch a Fire and Burn It series of recordings. But, yeah, Paul Kossoff became my really, really good friend. He had a large guitar collection, which I do too. We loved the same guitars. We loved the same amplifiers. And I loved the way he played. He had a really amazing vibrato, and his choice of notes were simple and really heavy. And he was a really nice guy because he came from a very affluent family, so he wasn't a show-off. His father was David Kossoff, who was a television and a movie star. And he comes from Golders Green, which is like the Malibu of London, let's say, without the beach. Yep. And so we became really good friends. And one day he said, hey, come over, you know, we'll have a drink and just talk guitars. So I came over, we're having a drink, we're talking guitars, we have a spliff, And then all of a sudden the phone rings, and it's Chris Blackwell from Island Records. So he tells Paul, he says, Paul, I want you to come to the studio because Bob Marley's here, and he's got an album called Nazi Dread that I want you to do the overdubs on. But he had a little bit too much to drink and felt that, like, you know, I can't really handle this right now. Meeting Bob Marley is stressful, and coming to do a studio session is a little stressful for me because I've got a little bit of the spirit inside me. So he said, look, Chris, there's a guy named Al Anderson here, this kid from New York, and I think he can cut it. And so he said, who's Al? He said, he's a tape op that's always with Woody, which was Chris Wood, the saxophone player, and Jim. So he says, I know that guy. He's a tape op here. And he goes like, yeah, he's always at Island. He says, okay, I'm going to send a mini cab for him to your place, pick him up, and then, we'll carry him down to the studio and see if he can handle the overdubs. So it was basically meant for Paul Kossoff of Free's guitar player. He was going to be the guy that was going to be on Nazi Dread, and he would have done equally as good a job as I did because Paul was really a great guitar player. But he gave me the opportunity. So I got to Basing Street Studios. This is about the middle of 1973.
Yep.
July, August, like this. And so I go into the studio. I didn't meet Bob yet. I walked straight into Island Basement Street Studios, straight into the studio, didn't meet anybody. Hey, Chris. Hey, Bob. I said, what do you want me to do? And he says, we want you to play like 5-6 songs. And I said, do me a favor. Let me hear one by one, and then let's just go. I want to hear the 5 songs you want me to play. So they play a couple of minutes of each song. And then I said, okay, I think I can handle this. So I think I was playing too much because I come from like a blues rock improvisationalist background. And it was a little bit too cutting for them. They said, hey, can you slow down a little bit and put some gaps in? And I said, okay, I understood. I was a little excited, so I was playing really a little bit too much.
Yeah.
So then I realized that when I heard the syncopation, because before I had come to Island to do the overdubs, Paul played Catch a Fire and Burning for me. He said, you're going to hear it. This is what you're going to hear, so be prepared. And I was like, he said, have you ever heard of the Wailers? I said, no, I've heard of Dennis Brown and John Holt and Jimmy Cliff, but I never heard of Peter, Bob, and Bunny.
Yep.
He says, so let me play Catch a Fire. So he played 3 or 4 songs on Catch a Fire, and then he gave me Concrete Jungle. I was like, okay, now I know where this is going. And then they played Burning, and I was like, oh, wow, this is really like rebel music. And so when I got there, I was slightly prepared, and so I began really to do the overdubs the way they kind of wanted to hear the way I played. So they played Them Belly Full, No Woman, No Cry, So Just Say, and we would just play straight through because it was an overdub, and the chord progressions were kind of easy. So I just laid back and just played some blues, and I played some acoustic guitar on Talking Blues, and they loved it. So after I had initially done the session, which was really fast, I played like 6 songs in 45, let's say an hour. And they were really happy that I was fast to understand what Bob's message was in his music. And I realized not to play while he was singing. Like Bob would sing, there was a gap. I'd play a little riff, and then we'd go to the refrain. And then after the refrain, before the vocals or after vocals came in, I played a little riff or a fill. And they really liked that because I stayed away from agitating the track so there was more syncopation in the music that he was creating. And they loved me. They was like, oh my God, it's great. They were jumping up and down and cheers. And we had some drinks and we talked. We briefly talked for about a half hour. Bob was really happy. And that was the end of the Nazi Dread session for me. So I went back to Paul's place and Paul said, what's it like? Oh man, it was interesting. And then like maybe a week later, they said, we wanted to have a meeting with you and Bob and me, Chris Blackwell, at Basin Street studio. So I went back to Basin Street where Bob and Chris was. And, none of the other musicians were there. Carly and Wire and Peter and Bunny were kind of still in the band at that time. Bob hadn't told them that it was the end until we did this recording, where he was satisfied that he was going to go on a solo career without Peter and Bunny. Yep. And so they made a deal for me to come to Jamaica. And so I accepted, but I just had like a young son born, so I wasn't too keen to leave London so quickly. But I did because I felt that the finances would help me support my family in England, because pounds are very heavy to establish when you're not consistently working all the time, and now you've got a young son. Yep. That you need to be working more regularly to be responsible for. So we made a date for me to leave England and go to Jamaica, but I went directly from London Heathrow Airport to Bob's mother's house in Delaware, and I stayed there for 6 months, 8 months, and then from Bob's mother's house straight to Hope Road Studios to start working with Bob at that time. And that's primarily how it all went down. And when I got to Jamaica, I was able to familiarize myself with all these new people: Bunny Wailer, Peter Tosh, Carlton Barrett, Kota, Bernard Harvey, and Wire Tyrone, and the whole crew that was there. There was like a whole group of guys that that embraced me and make me feel like I was part of the Bob Marley and the Wailers. Definitely. Except Peter and Bunny, because they thought I came there to separate them.
Yep. Well, Al, it is such an amazing story, and we are so proud and so pleased of the music that you have been able to provide us with over the years. I know we have to end the interview in a moment because you've got to get to another interview. So to finish off, I'd just like to say thank you so much for all the special music that you've given us over the years. And is there anything you would like to say to your fans who are listening right now before they go out and grab tickets to this amazing tour?
Yeah, I'd like to tell them we have 2 songs that's out in the market right now. We have one song which is in English called Song of the Divine, which is at the official Al Anderson website. You can find my music there. And we also have a new single, which is C2 Melodías, which is in Spanish. So that's the 2 songs that's out now, one in English, one in Spanish. Song of the Divine, which has a video we did in Bali, beautiful Bali, in some temples. Have you seen the video?
I have, yes. Yeah, it's very beautiful.
Oh man, that was so memorable. It's just the people really loved us and showed us love there, and it was Zen City. And then we have C2 Melodías, which is in Espanol. We sing in Spanish and English. And I'd like to say we're looking forward to all our fans and friends and loved ones to come out and have a wonderful time while we're doing Australia tour. And Dave, I gratefully thank you for having this interview with me and giving me an opportunity to reach our fans and our friends. It's going to be some original material, and at the same time, it's going to be the catalog of Bob Marley and the Wailers, your favorite songs you'll hear, and we're going to play some original songs too, and we look forward to next week being in Australia.